African American Legends highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, as well as theater, film, and journalism. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they've been previously excluded because of racism, lack of opportunity, and segregation. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr. Joining me on today's program is Bill Tatum, publisher of the New York Amsterdam News. And Bill, the Amsterdam News is a legend, and you're a legend. And I'm glad to have you talking about the black press today, and we'll lead you right into the role of the black press historically in the whole African-American diaspora.
Well, I'd like to do that, but first of all, I have to say that I am thoroughly intimidated by the state-of-the-art equipment that you have here. I am unaccustomed to being in a place that's a class operation. I'm used to CBS, ABC, NBC, New York 1. So I'm so glad to be here in a class operation with class music, with a class interviewer, so I thank you. Now, the Amsterdam News is legend. As you know, we are 87 years old now. 1909, several months before the beginning of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Since that time, we have been that beacon, if you will, in the New York area and internationally, to tell the truth, of the hopes, dreams, the aspirations, and the anger of a black population struggling so valiantly to be free in a nation that is not yet free.
Well, let's go back. The first black newspaper, I believe, was called Freedom's Journal.
Yes.
Published right here in New York
Yes.
City, right down around
Right.
Bleecker Street or
Yes.
somewhere
Yes.
thereabouts, 1827.
Yes.
The purpose of this was to let African Americans communicate among each other about concerns that they had. And that has been the traditional role of the press throughout. Martin R. Delaney, Ida B. Wells.
Yes. It was that way then, and it is that way now. Something happened. See, Roscoe, those of us who participated in the freedom movement, the struggles with Martin Luther King, I was there, as were you, on that march from Selma to Montgomery. You were there, as was I, when there was the Supreme Court decision. I was there when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was there when Martin Luther King, not Martin Luther King, but when Malcolm X was killed. And after all those years, we believed, Roscoe, that we were free. So what we did was to bring our money downtown. Our major organizations started having their fundraisers in the white hotels. I have no problem with that. But if we had thought that freedom was lent to us, lent, it was not achieved in the minds of those who have the ability to grant freedom and equality. And so what happened to our inner cities with the advent of urban renewal, which removed us, with the advent of our believing that things would be free and equal, we allowed, and we did this, allowed our inner cities to deteriorate. Many of our black newspapers were lost in this process because they lost their core.
Let's go back to that, because actually you mentioned the desegregation, the Brown case decision, 1954, which was the point where legal segregation ended and we overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. But in that interim, between 1896, actually going back to the Civil War and Martin R. Delaney's work, Ida B. Wells, and William Monroe Trotter, in that interim, the African American population was really mobilized by the black press.
It was mobilized by
the black press made possible groups like the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yes.
The black press made possible the survival of the black baseball leagues. The black press made possible the development of black business. So what you're saying is that when integration came, and we won't say we let down our guard, but we believed that equality was around the corner, the black press tended to recede, so that great papers like the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, the Norfolk Journal and Guide, the Atlanta World, the Amsterdam News were not as seen as important.
Well, they declined in importance because blacks wanted to believe that there was no longer any need for that which told their story. They believed that the white press would tell their story.
And many of the writers from the black press went to the white press as
but
well.
not until we had trained them, you see.
And
we trained them, but when they went to the white press, they were not able to tell our story. They were able to tell history, his story, as he saw the story, not as we saw the story. But marvelously enough, the black press did not die. And for those who happen to be black, or white for that matter, who really want to know what's going on in the black community, they must read the black press. And I find it amazing the number of whites that read and subscribe to the Amsterdam News. About 20% of our readership happens to be white. Now, why? They are those who wish to sell to the black community. They are those who wish to peep the whole card of the black community. They are those who would wish to destroy the black community who read our paper. So the black press has served many roles, and it has served few masters. There have been times fairly recently when there are those who would wish to buy my newspaper. There are blacks whose intent was not particularly noble, who wanted to use the paper as an instrument to be really nice to white folks.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, you see, there are those in the white community who love Negroes, blacks, who acquiesce. Those who say, well, you know, tomorrow is all right. We would like to borrow some freedom from you. And we would like you to do this for us and that for us and that for us. We would like you not to rock the boat. And if you have black newspapers who are willing to accept that as a premise, then you have total control of the people and their minds. As it is, there is control by whites of most of the jobs in this society. If you take a look at Harlem and you look at the number of jobs, the major number of jobs are in hospitals that are controlled by, for instance, Harlem Hospital, Columbia University.
But we do have North General Hospital controlled by blacks and Greater Harlem Nursing Home.
But we put that together.
Yeah, we
put that together,
right.
And we put it together with banks that happen to be white, and they hold the mortgages. So what we're saying is that we allowed our whole economic structure to be controlled by someone else when we had churches that collected the money from us, from our jobs as Pullman porters and shoeshine boys and maids. They collect our money and they built the marvelous edifices. And it's only now that they are beginning to realize that they were remiss in their responsibilities to us. We should have been building banks and institutions that would create jobs for our people, and we were not. So that, coupled with the hustle that had been perpetrated on us, that is the lending of freedom to us when there was never any real intent to free us from anything, these two combined created a disaster within the framework of the black community. And what has happened is that we have been pushed so close to economic extermination that for us to survive now is going to be a miracle. It is not that I'm pessimistic, because I know my America very well. And the moment you push America to the wall, they will either kill you or free you, and I'm prepared for each.
Well, let's go back to the black press's original role in protesting the oppression and the segregation, the police brutality. Many of the stories that I read and you read coming up in the black press had to deal with groups like Scottsboro Boys, had to deal with the lynchings, had to deal with the beatings, had to deal with the unfair police. And at the same time, the black press was showing through their articles about black drama, black literature, black sports, that blacks had a culture and were making major contributions. Now, with the Civil Rights Act being passed, many of the black press do not deal with those issues of injustice in terms of brutality, oppression, and things of that type. They get more into areas around the fights we have among ourselves about the economic control of our banks, for example, the economic control of our media companies. What is that? Is that because of the fact that they are overcome by the economic broader control and of the white community, and then only look for the more minute microcosmic things in our community to talk about?
Everything you said is grist for the mill, and that is the job of a newspaper, to criticize and to support. And a newspaper would be remiss if it were willing, as I did, to go after Ed Koch for 4 years until he was totally out of office. That is, when I went after him with Koch must resign or be removed, he had gotten 86% of the black vote. When after the 4 years of my going after him, he got 6% of the black vote. But that is the power. But
for the audience, they should know that for week after week after week, the Amsterdam News, written by you,
a front-page
editorial. Front-page editorial. Koch must go.
And you know, there are two people who deserve that same kind of treatment. One named, what's his name? The guy in City Hall now. I forgot, but there's a new one called Pataki. And these gentlemen deserve the same kind of treatment, but you can't go that way again. There must be another way to go after Giuliani and Pataki so that our folks can understand, as well as the larger white audience, not so large anymore and getting smaller every day, because this city is becoming a majority of minorities that will force there to be an answer to the treatment accorded minorities in this city. But the role of the black press is as it was. And if you pull a paper, the Amsterdam News, for example, from any day in 1954, you will have very much the same stories you have in 1995, or 1922, or 1917. The way we approach them is sometimes different. But that is the necessity for a black press that can tell my story, your story, from a vantage point that is totally understandable. I know with the Amsterdam News Foundation, we'll one day put together a journalism program where we will bring white journalists into our newspaper for a time so that they can learn who black people really are, because we are victimized by an image of ourselves as portrayed on television, which is somebody else's image of who we are, which is totally wrong. So the black press becomes important politically, socially, economically. Because if I can give you an example, I was called up to one of the newspapers in Westchester County to lecture to their group, a white newspaper, the major newspaper up there. And they invited me. I didn't understand why, but they said to me they wanted me to review their newspaper and tell their staff what I thought about it. Well, I thought that was very nice of them. And so I thumbed the newspaper, researched it, went up to speak. And they said, well, what do you think of our newspaper? I said, you know, it's a newspaper. And they said, well, what do you think? I said, well, I found it absolutely marvelous that there were no black people who died. There were no black people who got married. There were no black kids who graduated high school or college. There were a whole lot of black kids who got arrested for dope. There were a whole lot of black kids who went to jail for mayhem, and there was a lot of abuse of black women by their black males. And there was very little of this on the white side of the ledger. And I said, you know, I also learned that there were black men out there who could run like the wind. They could win any 100-yard dash. There were black men out there who could take this thing they call a football and throw it 100 yards and let another guy catch it. And there were those guys who could knock each other down in the ring. Even white people they could knock down. I saw that. But I said, you know, if you buried this newspaper for 100 years, and a new race of men emerged. And they pulled it out and looked at your newspaper for this day. They would pose the question, what manner of men and women were these? These women, oh, they had big behinds and they could shake their booty. But there were no writers. There were no artists. There was nothing except this superhuman race of athletic human beings who had no culture, no taste, no nothing. What manner of men and women were these? And I said, well, as for the newspaper, it's fine except for that.
What was their response?
They were shocked.
They couldn't have been shocked because they must have known that they didn't do these things.
But that's the pity of it, Roscoe. That's the pity of it. What was it that they exist in that book they call the Bible? Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That is, they do not know it intellectually. In their heart, they know that it's wrong. And as a consequence, you have a group of the most frightened people on earth because they know what they have done. And when you have done wrong, there's an expression in your community, Roscoe, that is the intellectual community, and it says what goes around comes around. And it is getting that way. I do not look, if I can, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You're my host. Please forgive me.
You're telling the story. I want to hear it.
I wrote an article week before last, about black men, and I called it The Silence of the Lambs. And indeed, black men are lambs. Lambs because we are victims of more things than can be named. Most of us, in order to simply survive, Roscoe, are dependent upon a job at a university, a job in state government, city government, well, not so much now with Giuliani and Pataki, but there was a time when the best jobs in the black community were civil service jobs and or the post office and or as teachers or lately at universities. Because we had not established a base of business because we were not allowed to. People would not lend us money, and they would not pay us adequately for our labor. So those who tell me it's your fault, you didn't pull yourself up by your bootstrap, that's crap. I never had any boots. And I do not accept any of this garbage that's being thrown out here about affirmative action. Never had affirmative action. What affirmative action did, in fact, do was to make an opportunity for the wives of white men to go into business calling themselves minorities when women constitute 54% of the American population, and you take the black women out of that who amount to about half of 33 million, and you take what's left, and you have 100 million white women who are called minorities in a country where the majority, male majority, says that they are minorities. And the nickel and dime that you can pick up in an affirmative action contract is primarily done to benefit white women. You can't do that, Roscoe. And they have done it, and they've made the American people buy it.
But look into the future. As you say, the colored populations of both the city and the nation are increasing. Indeed, the projections are by somewhere around 2040, half of this country will be people of color.
That's 2020, Roscoe.
What does this mean?
It means
what does this mean? What does this mean? Because you talked about the control of the society by white males. 93% of the executives of a major company are white males. But time and population change will make that necessary anyway. So then the question is, how do we get ourselves, our community, prepared to take the economic and political leadership that inevitably is going to be thrust upon us because of these demographic changes?
It will not be thrust.
We'll take it.
We'll have to take it. But you see, we are a gentle people. and we are a forgiving people. That's one of the things that irritates me so much, that we can be kicked directly in our butts, and we'll take the man or the woman who kicked us in the butt and say, forgive him or her father, because they know not what they do. Other people are not like that, Roscoe. If you kick some other people in the butt, they will cut your leg off if they don't kill you. So I am not sanguine about saying cutting somebody's leg off. But I know what other people have done to me. And we would never do the same thing to them. And because they know that, based upon our history and our performance of killing each other.
That's true.
Rather than somebody else.
Yeah, that's true. However, in this world of the future, there will be so many needs and opportunities that we, African Americans, need to be prepared to take advantage of those. Now, let me follow.
Okay, but I understand what you're saying, Roscoe.
Okay.
The root always has been education. But that's only one of the roots. You can take your education. For me, I was a National Urban Fellow at Yale. I have a master's from Occidental out in California. I have my undergraduate degree from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and I attended City University. And I was editor of my father's newspaper, the newspaper feature editor at City College, and editor-in-chief of the Lincolnia. I went to Europe, worked on major newspapers there. Could not get a job on any of the daily newspapers, not even as a copy boy. Now, the copy boys who were there had high school educations. And don't you tell me there is equality here. Roscoe, I'm a black man who can even speak a simple declarative sentence without blowing it. And I'm presentable. I got on this nice tie. I got on this pretty suit that's handmade. I'm presentable anywhere. And yet, a racist, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant has a better chance of becoming president of General Motors or the New York Times Company than I ever will have. And if somebody tells me,
will that be true in the future?
Roscoe, as long as we allow it, it will.
Well, okay, what are we going to do, particularly with the assistance of the black press, so that we don't allow it to happen?
First of all, you got to support the black press.
Number one, which means
let
to
me
buy it and read it.
Yeah, you buy it, you read it, you advertise in it. I mean, the black organizations have no problem with sending a press release of 14 pages to the Amsterdam News to say, put my social stuff in your newspaper, and they're charging $150, $200 for a ticket. Never occurs to them that maybe they ought to take a small ad. Never. I've talked to you about this before. And then they take the Daily News and some of the other newspapers, but particularly the Daily News, has decided that black people are pretty damn stupid, that they can take Kwanzaa and run with it in their feature section and call black people all kinds of names like animals on their front pages and on their editorial pages. Go look at affirmative action and say, what are these niggas doing? They don't use the word nigger, but you don't even have to read between the lines, just on the side and under and back, and you've got it. That is an attitude of the Daily News about black people. It is a total disdain, and while they're doing this, we go out and buy that paper. The same is true of the Post. The same is true of the New York Daily News and the Post. And when we see a promotion like Black Expo, when we see Kwanzaa, when we see a major black organization having a major affair, they go to he or she who is ostensibly the enemy for the 5,000 or the 25,000 that they need so they won't have to work so hard on selling the tickets. Now, can I blame them for it? Yes. But do I understand? You're damn right I understand. Because we have gotten into that cycle that says we can't do for ourselves what we must do. And until that happens, we're going to be relegated to the trash heap of history because we will not support our own. Well, let's take, for example, if we have a major organization that gets into trouble for whatever reason, or doesn't get into trouble, but a newspaper, a white newspaper, for example, gets some scuttlebutt or some negative material about a black organization, especially one that is making a difference, and they will exploit it to a fare thee well. And then my black brother and sister, and I guess you can call them sister, no, black brothers and sisters would say, well, I told you so.
Well, we're coming to the close of the program.
How come? I don't want to stop.
Beautiful, but you're a legend, so legends have to stop sometime.
Oh.
One of the things I want us to close on is, what do you see as the future for the black press in this country?
I think that as long as we live in a racist society, there is a future for us. I wish there would come a time when we could work our way out of this. But I don't see it in my lifetime, Roscoe. But then, hell, my lifetime is maybe 5 years, maybe 10, maybe 2. But I don't care. I have an instrument that I'm going to use to speak as loudly and as efficiently as I know how about the plight of my people and what we must do about it. I expect the support of the black people of the city and white people of goodwill. But if it's not forthcoming because my people do not understand, I will write and I will write and I will write until they do understand. And in the meantime, we've got to have people like you who insist that my children know how to read.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill Tatum, legend, publisher of the Amsterdam News. Clearly, with this message, the black press not only will survive, but will grow. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Roscoe.